Good Data by BadVR. So, welcome to the first episode of Good Data by BadVR. This is our new podcast that we're starting. I believe most of the people listening to this are probably going to know who I am. My name is Suzanne Borders. I'm the co-founder and CEO of BadVR. My background's product and UX design. I have here with me today Stefanie Feldman, who I will allow to introduce herself.
Hi, as Susie said, I'm Stefanie Feldman. I'm a product manager at BadVR. I came to BadVR with about 13 years of experience in the interior design industry and took a leap of faith about a couple years ago, just over 2 years, and joined Susie over at BadVR.
Yeah, so that sort of segues nicely into the topic that we're going to discuss today, which is broadly speaking risk. Like, what is risk? How does it play a role in your professional life, in your personal life? What are the benefits of risk? A lot of people, it's a topic that, especially in a startup setting, is very relevant. A lot of people don't take journeys into the startup world because it's too high risk, or some people are really attracted to it. So overall, with this podcast and with these episodes, what we're trying to do is really just hone in on a topic and just discuss it. So we're not going to be getting into anything necessarily about the business or about the product. We're just trying to have good conversations about good data, sponsored by BadVR. So I'd like to ask you a few questions about that journey, coming into the tech industry from the interior design world. Like, what was that like? I remember having a conversation with you because we had worked together on an interior design project or software for the interior design world. And I'd always really admired your character and your work ethic. But what was that sort of that taking that risk or that step, coming in from a completely different industry, joining not only a tech business, but a tech startup, an emerging tech startup in this really, really brand new field of AR and VR technology? What was that risk like? And what was that, how did it feel to take that sort of, that journey?
Sure. Well, journey is a great word for it. It definitely was. So I started out in interior design. When I got out of college, I worked for a small design firm in New York, and then slowly moved my way through different areas of interior design. I worked at a lighting company. I went back to interior design, worked for a big celebrity designer in LA. And then I slowly started moving towards interior design related tech startups. And that's where I learned about the tech side of things. And I love the interior design world in LA. It was great. I had a whole community here, and I learned so much, and it was so much fun. But I realized that I wanted to do something different. I never felt as passionate about it as I saw other people. I loved interior design, and it was really fun, but there was something in my heart that wasn't fully in it. And I remember having a conversation with you one day and just telling you like things that I was feeling, and and you brought up an opportunity to try something new, and I knew that I didn't want to be in interior design anymore, but I knew what I wanted to be, and I wanted to work for someone or woman who was going to empower me. I wanted to work somewhere where I could grow, somewhere I could be creative still, but just change where I was going, and I didn't know what that was. And the second you opened up the idea of even working at BadVR, something totally new, I immediately felt excited. And it was very nerve-wracking to think of changing something that I was so comfortable with. And I think I stayed in interior design for so long because I was comfortable with it. I knew so many people, I had a great community, but it was time to try something different. I think I'd hit my end point where I didn't feel that I was growing anymore.
So you think that you are overall somebody who's, because I tend to find in life there's people that are risk junkies that really love taking risk, and there tend to be people that are a little risk averse that don't like to take the risk or don't like the change. Where do you think you fall on that sort of spectrum?
It's funny. Well, if you ask my mom, she'll say I don't like change, and it's true. I'm not great with it, but I find that once I allow myself to take that risk, take that leap of faith, change into something that I was maybe a little nervous or scared or didn't think I'd be good enough or I would know enough. Once I do it, I realize that it was a lot easier than I thought. And
Yeah.
that, as they say, with great risk comes great rewards.
Right.
I actually have a bracelet that I wear every day that says nothing dared, nothing gained.
Yeah.
And I got that a few years ago on a fortune cookie, and it stuck with me.
Yeah.
And so change is definitely hard and it's scary, but I can say that I've learned so much in the past 2 years. I say sentences and put things together that I would have never thought would have come out of my mouth. So
yeah, it's
change.
been great to see you grow, you know, and grow into that role and learn all these new things. For myself, I fall on the opposite end. I'm a risk junkie. I love taking risks, and my journey has been kind of the opposite of that, which I think is great to come at it from both angles.
Yeah.
You know, the vast majority of my early life as an adult was all about taking risks, but my problem was that I didn't take them in a thoughtful, calculated manner. I just sort of broadly took them, all the risks that I possibly could. And the process that I really found over time that works is, if you are somebody who is a risk junkie like myself, it's not just taking the risk, it's taking the right risk at the right time with the right people. So you have to have like a framework in place to ensure that like the risk that you're taking isn't just careless or foolhardy or taking it for risk's sake or for adrenaline's sake.
Yeah, definitely.
There's definitely a point in life where that's a good thing to put yourself out there and to take a lot of risks. But I think when you're talking about really honing in on success, you have to do it. You have to take that risk or integrate that factor within a larger framework. So you have to have the other parts of it in place. An analogy for it would be, I guess, you know, if you're building a home, you have all these different pieces that you're constructing. Or if you have a team of people, you have all these different pieces of the team. And risk is just one of many pieces of a successful enterprise, whether that be a business or successful life, whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. And I think that people get hung up on like, oh, well, you have to take any risk or all risks are equal, and that's not true. Not all risks are equal. All of them come with some reward if done well, but the ones that really, really matter, in my opinion, are the ones that are within that framework, that are thoughtful and that are, you know, right time and all of that. And a lot of people also ask me in particular about, as a founder, the decision to start a business and to take that risk personally. And it's funny too, because a lot of people think it's quote unquote brave. For me, it was the only path that I really had, because I just am not a person that can follow other people. I've tried working at other companies and I can do that to some point or period to some extent, but ultimately I'm not happy. So it was, to me, it was just something that I ended up doing because I had to. So in that sense, it wasn't even a calculated risk, and I didn't think of it as a risk. It was just sort of an inevitability and a full extension of what I was doing or what I wanted to do.
So that would actually you were avoiding the risk of not doing something. You know,
Yes.
It would be a risk for you to not jump into starting your own business, because then you would be miserable or not, doing your true calling, what makes you happy.
Absolutely. And I think it's, when you're coming at it from a perspective of building a team, you want a group of people, like you would a sports team, that have different strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
So when I look at myself and I'm selecting a co-founder or I'm selecting people who work with me, I think a mistake that a lot of people also make is they try to hire or work with people who are exactly like them. So if that were true for me, I would hire a lot of other tattooed, crazy risk takers who love jumping out of airplanes and parachuting or whatever. But my observation and what I've learned is it's great to have complementary people that are the opposite of you, to sort of ensure that you don't end up going too far in any one direction. It's like looking at it like a sports team. You want to have a person who can cover this position, a person who cover that position. You don't want like 5 centers. You want, a center or power forward. You want all of these different people coming together to make a team that can do more than just one thing. So I also think it's funny too, because a lot of the times when I'm being asked questions about my team, or even in my personal life, people assume that I'm going to surround myself with like tattooed people that have like mohawks and, neck tattoos or whatever. But
one day maybe we'll get them.
Really, it's more about finding the opposite of me, people who are strong in areas where I am weak.
Yeah.
So I think that really, talking about risk and the reward of it, I think it's really more about finding complementary versus being just 100% going in that one direction.
Absolutely. It's about finding different perspectives, and that's what you do by bringing in people that are not like you.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And I think there's also this idea that a lot of the times as well, when I'm talking to younger, at BadVR we have interns, and we're, a lot of the times the people that join the team are maybe coming like you were from different industries. And there's this desire or want to sort of find a shortcut to success, or find a way to accelerate the process of learning, or accelerate the process of, in the intern's case, their career. And what I always like to tell people too is that I view risk as that sort of secret ingredient, or that shortcut, if you will, to accelerating the learning curve, or accelerating some path to or through your professional career. So, people, if you come into a startup and you take the risk, you might get paid a little less, you might have working conditions that are not quite what they would be at a large company. But a good example of utilizing that risk is you're coming in, you're taking a hit on maybe some of these areas, but you're able to go from maybe being an intern to being middle management, or even the manager of an entire team in a 1 to 3 year period of time. Whereas within a larger organization, that might take you 10 or 15 years.
Yeah.
So it is one of those things where if you are willing to take the risk, it's that secret ingredient that everybody's looking for, that accelerant, or that, way to sort of get ahead. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I've always been drawn to, not always, but my last few jobs were always at startups. And people ask me what I'm doing and why I keep going back. And sometimes I think I'm crazy for doing it, but I like being a part of the vision from the beginning.
Yeah.
I like being part of the team and building it together. And I find that I get more of a voice, and I get to see what's happening. There's such a satisfaction of going into something that you're molding and growing together and seeing it come to fruition. And it's really an amazing thing that it is risky. You don't know what it's going to be or how it's going to go, but with anything you don't. So why not do something where you get to be more part of it from the get-go?
Right, absolutely. Yeah. And if you're thinking about whether risk is a good thing, a bad thing, it really comes down to what are your goals and what are you looking for, and how can you best utilize risk to get from where you are today to where you want to go. And also, of course, what your comfort levels are. It's funny, I've gone to a couple wealth management meetings where they're talking about investing money or whatever, and they ask what's your risk profile, and they use these little tests about how would you react in this situation, or how would you react in this situation, to determine what your risk profile is, and then of course to make investment decisions with your money based upon that. So if you're low risk, they're going to put it in bonds where it's super safe but the return's really low. If you're a high risk person, they might put it into investing in a startup or something like that, where it's more volatile, but ultimately you have a much higher likelihood of having a bigger return on the investment. In the finance world, it's a well-known thought about everybody having a different risk profile and everybody being comfortable with risk in different ways. And there's also this very well understood, relationship between risk and then reward. And the understanding too that everybody individually goes towards that, and they fall somewhere on that spectrum. So I don't think that it's really something that you can look at as being necessarily good or bad. It really just depends on the context. It depends on you as an individual, and then also depends on what you're trying to achieve. Because I think, in certain points in people's lives, they have a higher risk profile, they are a higher appetite for risk, or a lower appetite for risk, and that also changes too, just as you, from being a young person getting to being older, you have more to lose when you're older, so you're less willing to take risks. Yeah, but I think it's one of those, it's just an ingredient like many other ingredients in life that can be utilized in certain ways, going back and forth, depending upon what you're trying to achieve, really.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's really like when you're going to take a risk, asking, what is it that you want?
Yeah.
What's the intention behind it?
Yeah.
You know, because risk can have a negative connotation, or it can have something that's really good. You think of something as, people talk about risky behavior.
Yeah.
I'm like, what does that mean? But then also risk in terms of advancing something in your financial life. You know, it's losing my train of thought there.
It's okay.
Like, where was I going with that?
It's no worries.
Yeah.
I think it's just one of those things that a lot of people, either if they're coming at it from a side of like, I'm risk adverse, it seems kind of frightening or scary or something that, you know, they're not necessarily comfortable with. If you're coming at it from my side, it's just a natural thing, but you can go too far in either one direction. So I guess like the point that I would try to make, or the drive home for anyone who's sort of contemplating this topic, is it's really about balance. It's about taking the right risk at the right time, and then also just determining what you want to get out of the situation. You know, and on our team, it's definitely been a conversation that I've had with many of our younger team members. And there have definitely been some very cute and interesting stories that have come out of that. One most recently, we have a customer based in the Omaha area, and you, along with a couple other team members, went out there and enjoyed the Omaha culture, which I will let you explain.
Sure. So Omaha, middle of the country, someplace I had never been before. I'm a California girl, born and raised. And we went to a beautiful steakhouse, because whenever you go to Omaha, people always bring up Omaha steaks.
Yeah,
you're going to get one.
That's true.
And I'm not a big steak person. I like hamburgers, or I like ground beef, but just like a piece of meat, it's never really my thing. But when in Rome, or when in Omaha, as they say. So we went to this really fantastic steakhouse, and I was with Jad, co-founder and CTO at BadVR, and Brian, our senior engineer, and
VP of engineering.
VP of engineering.
Yes.
My apologies.
No, it's okay.
And we're moving so fast. And Jad ordered, what was it? The thing of ribs.
Oh yeah, the rack of ribs.
A rack of ribs.
Yeah.
And you know, I've seen ribs come. I don't eat them personally. I've tried them, but he ordered them, and it was you would think that it would just be like a normal amount, and it was the size of the plate and double. They were stacked on top of each other, and it was just it was mind-boggling. I mean, I've never seen that much meat on someone's plate at one time. You would think that was for a family of 5, maybe more, maybe 10.
Yes.
It was so much. So it was quite the experience.
Sounds like the Midwestern culinary experience in one little anecdote. Like, there's no stopping the amount of food that they will pile onto a plate. No offense to people listening from the Midwest.
It was delicious. I had some of the best food. I had a meatloaf the first night and everything, but when I came back to LA, they just opened up a Shake Shack around the corner for me that I was waiting for months. I couldn't even look at it. I couldn't smell it. When I came back, I said, no more red meat for, at least a few weeks. But
I remember, because I had ended up staying back on that trip, holding down the fort here in Los Angeles. And, we have a company Slack, like most people have a company Slack, and you guys had posted photos of these amazing plates full of animal flesh, and one of our younger team members, who is a very big animal fan, and I was making fun of these portions of flesh, just posting the word flesh multiple times in the Slack channel with various different GIFs and emojis. Flesh. And I think took a big risk there on my end, knowing that some of my team members are a little bit very sensitive to that sort of thing. Ended up, I think, being misinterpreted, at least initially, and thinking that I was like a very big advocate of just eating flesh, and that I myself just was like so psyched about these like mountains of animal flesh. But really, I was just, I myself am not a big, I grew up, my parents are hippies, so we grew up like not really eating a lot of meat. So I do eat meat now occasionally, like some chicken or stuff, but I don't really like, I don't care for beef, and I definitely don't care for steaks or big chunks of like animal flesh. So it was me making fun of it, and but it was quite the unique team interaction. I'm not 100% sure what that has to do with risk, really, but it's a fun little team anecdote that
when
dropped that
risk trial.
Yeah, I mean, going into a new sort of like experience, especially a new culture, I think a lot of people outside of America, and some people even in America, especially in larger cities, don't realize how much of a cultural difference there is between a city, a large metropolitan area in the U.S. and then a smaller city, in the middle of the country. I think there's more of a cultural difference between a large American city and a small American city than there is between a large American city and a large city in another country. So Definitely. Like LA and Hong Kong are more similar than LA and Omaha, in my opinion. So just taking that risk of like from going to a place like Omaha that maybe you've never been before and going and experiencing all the different cultural things from there. I grew up in Kansas City, so I'd spent a lot of time in Omaha. Especially like when I was a teenager, I would go up there a lot to see shows and stuff, and it was only 2 or 3 hours north from where I was located. So every time that there is an opportunity to go to Omaha, I'm like, I'll stay and hold down the fort.
I love it. I get something new and different, and being
no risk for me there. I've already been and done that, but for you, it's something new.
Being at home for the past year and a half, I was so excited to get out of my little apartment, and I'm very grateful with where I live. But just a new scenery was wonderful, and definitely the risk I was willing to take. I'm definitely hoping that we can I'm looking for, hopefully a client in maybe like Paris or something, or go on count me in. Go on that. I'll join trips if we're on a plane to Paris. I will take whatever risk necessary to go.
Absolutely. So another topic that I wanted to touch on in terms of risk is the perception of it being either more scary than it is or less scary than it is. And since this is a podcast called Good Data, since I own a company called BadVR that does data visualization, I have to bring this point up. So a lot of the times that the feeling about a certain risk does not necessarily match up with the facts or the data about it. For instance, driving your car is far more deadly than getting on an airplane. Like the data, the statistics behind the amount of fatalities or accidents when you're driving a car is much, much higher than any sort of fatalities or accidents that happen on airplanes. Yet, people have a much, much greater fear of flying than they do. You're an example of this. I forgot about that. Than they do of driving a vehicle. So when you're thinking about risk and you're looking at it, and maybe if you are a risk-averse person, you have to really frame it properly. And it's just a fundamental human way of reacting to things, where if it's more of an unknown, it's going to seem more risky and more scary than it actually is. But for myself, less so for me, because I love risk, so I just like run headfirst into it. But when I'm dealing with people, I'm working with people or mentoring people who tend to be more risk adverse, I find that it's very helpful to just look at the data around what you're doing to really give yourself an understanding of where that risk falls in the hierarchy of risks that you're taking in your life. So another one of other entrepreneurs that I've worked with or that I've mentored or that I'm an advisor for their company, especially the risk adverse ones, I like to, if they're facing a really tough question or they're running into, oh, should we do this? Should we take this risk or not take this risk? Is really just go to the data, look at what the actual likelihood of failure is, and then also look at what's the worst case scenario. If you do fail, then what? If it is catastrophic, then obviously think very deeply about it. But for me, a lot of the times, like, well, even if I fail and it's not that big of a deal, there's no reason just not to do it. But yeah, so I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I was thinking about that actually as I was coming over here today. What's the risk in failure? Because I think a lot of people are scared of the what ifs.
Yeah.
But wait, sorry, I have this in my notes. I wrote it down. I think that taking risks takes away the what if.
Yeah.
You know, it's if you never do something, you'll never know, and you'll continue to think about it. So for me, I didn't have a fear of flying when I was younger. It happened later in life, and I'm someone who loves to travel.
Yeah.
Travel just like brings me life. I love it. And so I know that if I don't take the risk of getting on the airplane, that I won't be able to go to my destination. I won't be able to have those life experiences that are so important to me. And it does go back to the data. I'm someone who's, I wouldn't say necessarily risk advert, but I'm very methodical with every decision that I make. I am an overthinker. I know that I am. It's something I'm working on, but I have to think of everything, every possible scenario. And I like to say I'm very creative. I create a lot of stories in my head. So it's stopping those stories and really figuring out what are the facts.
Yeah.
And that does help me make a better decision so that I can truly do something that I want, something that's going to bring me joy, because I don't want to go ahead in my life and look back and realize I didn't do something because I was scared, because I didn't want to take a risk that by the data isn't all that bad. It's not that scary. It's you know, going to the flying or being in a plane and driving a car. It's really such a great analogy of how things can hold you back. It's like, if anything, if you look at the data, I should be more scared of driving the car. Right. So,
it ends up being not as big a deal as people make it out to be. Yeah. Although I'm saying that as you know, a risk. Yeah. I am very much, I love risk. I get off on it. I love the adrenaline rush from it. But yeah, I do see a lot of people held back by things that are, I'm like, even if the worst case scenario happens, like, it's worse to miss out on the opportunity of doing something or the life experience of doing it. Because I also think a lot of people don't value failure. And failure is one of the most valuable things, in my opinion. Like, you just have to sometimes, like, face plant in life to really understand how to succeed. And a lot of the times people think that success is where you really learn how to do something, but really it's all the failures that lead up to the success that teach you much, much more than succeeding ever could. Oh, yeah. And almost in a way, I probably shoot myself in the foot, because I sort of seek out failure because I feel like I learn more from it. Oh, yeah. And I'm less comfortable with success because it's like, I don't know how to handle that. Then it's what? Not, you know, then what? It's not challenging to me to succeed. It's challenging to me to fail. Yeah. And there's this really great quote by one of my favorite poets, Rilke, who said that the point of life is to fail at ever greater things. So, you know, I always try to, like, if I am failing, which I do like to fail often, I want to fail at more and more challenging things. And that's how I sort of measure my progress. But when you're talking about risk and people who are afraid to take it, it's like, ultimately that's a fear of failure. It's a fear of failing. And you really have to get over that if you want to, like, level up in this game called life or whatever. You know, you have to be comfortable with that. And until you become comfortable with that, you're not really ever going to learn those really, really important lessons. So that ties into risk too. Ask yourself, if you are a risk-averse person, what is it that you're scared of, you know, like, and maybe go into that and run into that thing that scares you and get through it to the other side. And once you go through that transformation, that's when you will be free to actually now succeed. And I think that's something people get really hung up on too, is they're afraid, oh, well, if I fail once or I fail, then I can never succeed. And that's just not, that's not how life works,
in every area of your life, there's going to be failures and setbacks from working from your job, from relationships to try everything, you're going to be met with challenges. And it's just as much of a risk to stay at home in bed and not go out into the world as it is to go do something that scares you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I think not doing something is more scary to me.
Yeah, it's the opportunity cost of inaction. You know, every time you choose not to do something, you're missing out on the opportunities that would have been available had you done it. And I think, what was that? I read this quote recently where they're talking about reach is a serendipity machine. So the more like that you go out into the world and the more that you do things, these natural sort of serendipitous moments will happen just on their own. You know, so people talk a lot about all these weird synchronicities or how did you just become so lucky to just that this all worked out. And it's not so much luck as it is just repeating the same behavior and going out into the world and just trying and trying and doing and trying. And the more that you do that and the more that you garner, you know, for tech people, the great analogy would be the database. The larger your database, the more likely it is that you'll find those unique connections that ultimately lead to a really high, great success, you know, or accomplishment in some way.
Yeah.
But you don't get those things if you just stay at home. And
absolutely.
I hate to be like that, like older, I'm 35 person to like harp on it, but I think one of the things that the younger generation misses a lot is that, you know, you have to have some uncomfortable failures in life. You cannot insulate yourself from that. And you can never really meaningfully succeed if you always avoid any sort of negative feeling or any sort of unhappiness or stress. Like the whole point in life isn't to be happy, really. It's to become fulfilled, which is a deeper, more nuanced state of being. And you cannot reach fulfillment or get fulfillment or achieve fulfillment without taking risks, without feeling discomfort, without failing, you know? And I think like going back to that, risk, people who don't like risk are afraid of failure. You cannot be afraid of failure. It's like I have this movie poster on my wall from the film Apocalypse Now. And one of a quote from that movie, so I'm full of quotes and
I love it. Keep them coming.
One of my favorite actors is Marlon Brando. I love Marlon Brando because he's really raw in his performances and he goes on these like long monologues about stuff, and most of the time his monologues are not written or they weren't written. He just sort of made them up on the spot, or he would, you know, take cue cards to the ceiling and sort of like use them as these triggers to go on these long rants or whatever. But anyways, that movie Apocalypse Now, he says, you know, fear and mortal terror have to be your friends, and if they're not your friends, they're your enemies. And that's true. Like if you cannot make, it's not necessarily in this situation with fear or mortal terror, but if you cannot make failure a friend, then it is definitely something that you have to fear. But once you get past that fear and you become comfortable with failure and it becomes quote unquote a friend, then there's nothing that you can't do.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can't accomplish, you know?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It's really just, it's once you do something that you were scared of and you realize it's, oh, that was it. Like, that was easy. Recently I was going through something in my personal life and we went back to Omaha a few weeks ago, and I was nervous to go. I had so much to do, and I was really adverse to going for a moment because I had so many things that I had to take care of, and I was scared to leave everything behind in the way I was feeling. And the second I got off that plane in Omaha, which was a direct flight on a little tiny plane, which I was scared to get on, I did it, and I had this sense of relief.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, I did it.
Yeah.
And I felt so proud of myself. And there's something that, like, you can't ever get that feeling if you don't just go for it.
Yeah.
And it was such a great feeling, and it gave me, I just felt more empowered, and it gave me energy to keep moving forward. And it was like, all right, I didn't think I could do it, and I did. And it's just, it's constantly proving yourself that you are greater than you think, you are stronger than you think, and you're braver than you think.
Yeah,
and that's what comes with risk. And it's a really wonderful feeling when you can surpass those fears. And they don't always just go away, but I think it's really about embracing the discomfort.
Yeah,
you're
absolutely.
gonna come across uncomfortable situations and scenarios and situations, and embracing that and learn. It's really learning how to handle it and how to. If you have to think about the data or the facts that go into something you're afraid of, or if you have to just meditate or whatever you have to do, there is so many tools to go through and just really to be able to get, going back to what we said before, getting what you want.
Yes.
What's your intention? Like what's behind it?
Right.
You have to go through these hurdles to ultimately.
And that's a good point too. You have to know what you're in it for. What is the ultimate goal? What do you want to achieve? And whatever it is that you're doing. And I think a lot of people just sort of go through life and avoiding discomfort, avoiding risk, and not really having an end goal in mind, or not really having a goal in mind beyond this vague concept of like, I'd like to be happy, but they don't really know what happiness means, so they go about these things and they do the things that they think will make them happy, but then ultimately once they do those things, they're still not happy, and they're just sort of living in a responsive state, just responding every day to the things that come in versus...
Playing it safe.
Right, and playing it safe versus trying to set a goal and then making proactive choices that move you closer to that goal. And then also really going like deep inside yourself and say, well, what do I want out of this life? What do I have to say?
Yeah.
What would I like to share with the world? How would I like to spend my time? I think that self-reflection is so important, because without that, you're basically a ship sailing unmoored in the seas. You don't have a course, you don't have a purpose, you don't have a goal, and of course you're not going to be happy like that, or you're not going to feel, most importantly, fulfilled. But this concept that everybody is entitled to feel good, or they're entitled to feel safe or comfortable, or it's like, that's not true. Nobody's entitled to that. And not only that, but if that's what you're seeking out, you're shooting yourself in the foot. You're not going to achieve what it is that even if your goal in life is just to be happy, you can't get there without feeling discomfort or stress on some path towards that. But definitely you're not going to get there if you don't understand exactly what it is that you want.
Exactly. I think for me too, I've dealt with anxiety or certain things in my life and where I just didn't feel good. And I got to a point where I just said, I don't want to feel like this anymore. And so again, it goes back to that, I can risk not being happy and not doing things I want by staying in bed, by doing the things that are comfortable but still feeling unhappy. And you get to a point where it's like, all right, enough. Like, I want to move forward, and the only way to move forward is through. And it's really just about pushing yourself just a little, extra harder than maybe you would have, and it is that stepping off the plane in Omaha or taking the job at BadVR, those things that you're scared to do, and you realize like it feels better than you can imagine.
Well, I hope it didn't end up working at BadVR being too scary.
It was just not at all.
No, I know. I'm playing with that. I know. It's overwhelming. I know for sure. Yes. And definitely, I mean, it was overwhelming for me to start my own company and be a CEO. I didn't know. I'm still learning how to do that. I'm naturally a pretty introverted person, so the concept of like having a large team of humans and having to motivate them and that's been a whole learning curve for me, but I think all of us benefit together by being the type of people who understand that discomfort and risk and all of that have long-term payback or long-term payoff, and we're not really focus so much on being happy or comfortable today as we are at feeling fulfilled tomorrow.
Exactly.
And that's, part of running a company is building a culture, and that's part of the culture that I'm trying to imbue in my company, and then also more broadly just to share with the world, because I see so much, of these ideas that I just think are wrong, where you're prioritizing short-term happiness over long-term fulfillment. And I just am really glad for me personally that I can achieve some of my goals through this company. Not all of them obviously have personal goals as well as professional goals, but professionally the goals that I'd like to achieve. And I couldn't do it without, not only the risks that I've taken, but people like you that are willing to take the risk to believe in me. So that's been really, really awesome.
Well,
too.
it goes both ways. I'm super grateful that it's like not only was I taking a risk on a new job, you were taking a risk on me coming from a completely different background, and you had a vision and an idea of me coming from interior design and taking that spatial awareness that I learned in that industry and bringing it into VR. But I'm so grateful that you wanted to take a risk on me and bring me into this role, and you have empowered me and you have taught me, and same with Jad and everyone that's come onto the team. I've learned something from everyone. There's risk on both sides, especially when joining a company. It's not just what I did, it's also what you did, and so without that risk for one another, we wouldn't be where we are today.
Yeah. And being as rad as we are today.
That's right.
No, it's very true, and that's one of the things we will have an episode coming up soon about hiring and about just that's one of the hardest things in my opinion in a startup is finding good people, hiring good people. But just to touch on that a little bit, for me personally, it's always more about someone's character and who they are as a person than it is about their specific skill set. I mean, there are obvious exemptions to this rule for specific roles, but broadly speaking, I'm looking for people with good character, who are hard workers, who can handle adversity and grow from adversity. So for me, that's what I'm looking for, and because I know that specific skill sets like how to use Photoshop or how to use Lucidchart or SharePoint or whatever, you can teach that to people who are naturally bright or naturally hardworking, but you cannot teach somebody to care when they don't, or you can't teach somebody to have character, or to not crumble under stress if that's just not who they are as a person, And it's like I saw in you somebody who could handle stress, who really had a strong sense of self and a strong sense of perseverance, and who would continue even when things got rough. So to me, regardless, I love that you had a 3D sense of design, but like the character is really what, it's like that's a risk. I will always take a risk on somebody who has a character like that.
Thank you.
Of course.
That means a lot to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, it's true. And a lot of people too, especially in startups, and I get this from like investors and stuff, they want the PhD from like Harvard or MIT or whatever, and I just really couldn't care less about that. To me, it's just like education, sure, I believe in education, but like when you start talking about and especially in a start, it's like, dude, it's so hard on a personal level. If you gotta have a character or some life experience, or it's just not like, and the cloistered walls of academia, and I'm gonna sound like I'm such a hateful person. I don't hate academia, but it's just not an environment, in my opinion, that really builds grit or character. It just really insulates people from life, and that's really good if you need them to be like brainiac theoretical stuff. But in startups, it's really hands-on. It's about execution, not like brainiac sort of stuff. So it's just really, to me, it's like super, super important that people that I'm looking for have that, personal grit and character and experience, and not being able to crumble under stress, because as I know, every day is like super, super stressful. There's always something, just a little bit, always something that needs to like be done that isn't done. There's deadlines, whatever. So coming from a place where that hasn't been their day-to-day life, I just and then also we can go into the whole thing about like, hiring ex-Google people or ex-Facebook people, again, big company, like completely different. Like I found that a lot of the times hiring people like that, it's just they end up, expecting all these other things. That they do one thing really, really well, but then they don't want to do anything around that or adjacent to it. Whereas obviously at a startup, you have to do a little bit of everything. Every day. So it's just, different strokes for different folks. I have nothing against people in academia. I have nothing against people who work at large companies. I'm just saying for my business and what I hire for and look for in people, it's just that ain't it, bro.
It's got to be the right fit. And especially the fact that we spend so much time with the people that we work with. So you have to get along. You have to learn how to communicate. You have to learn how to work well together. And it's really building off of each other's strengths.
Yes.
And you bring so much more to that from other life skills. There are things you learn in in school that are extremely valuable, of course, but it shouldn't be just about that. There's so much more. I definitely know that I learn more by doing than whatever I read in a book.
Yeah, for sure. Me too.
Yeah.
I'm a learner by a doer.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, so I think that's really all the time that we have for today. Thank you so much, Stefanie. I couldn't have picked a better co-host. And for the audience moving forward, we're going to continue to have these good conversations about good data, topics ranging from everything, hiring, entrepreneurship, to feminism, to whatever else we end up coming up with. Really the goal is just to have great conversations with great people. We will also be having some guests on this podcast moving forward too. We will be releasing a list of who will be. And if you're interested in coming onto this podcast or being a guest, please feel free to reach out, info@badvr.com. But yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, looking forward to doing it again.
Me too.
Peace out, dudes.
Bye.
Good Data by BadVR.